The British Empire was one of the largest empires in history, spanning over a quarter of the world's landmass at its peak. The empire began in the late 16th century with the colonization of Ireland and the establishment of the East India Company in 1600. From there, the British Empire expanded rapidly through a combination of military conquest, economic exploitation, and the establishment of colonies and protectorates around the world. The British Empire was built on the foundations of trade and commerce, with the East India Company playing a pivotal role in establishing British influence in India and the Far East. The company's control over trade and commerce in these regions enabled Britain to build a vast network of colonies and protectorates across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The British Empire's military might was also instrumental in its expansion. British armies and navies conquered and occupied vast territories, often by force, and established control over local populations. This led to a number of conflicts and wars, including the Boer War, the Indian Rebellion of 1857, and the Anglo-Zulu War. The 19th century saw the British Empire reach its zenith, with Queen Victoria presiding over an empire that spanned the globe. However, the 20th century saw the empire's gradual decline, with the two world wars playing a pivotal role in its dissolution. The First World War weakened the empire's economic and military power, with Britain struggling to maintain its global position in the aftermath of the conflict. The Second World War saw Britain once again emerge victorious, but at a cost that it could ill afford. The empire's resources were stretched to breaking point, and the rise of anti-colonialism and nationalism in the aftermath of the war ultimately spelled the end of the British Empire. However, the British Empire's dissolution began in the aftermath of World War II, when many of its colonies began to demand independence. The process of decolonization was gradual, with some colonies gaining independence peacefully, while others experienced violent struggles. India, the crown jewel of the British Empire, gained independence in 1947, followed by Pakistan and Sri Lanka in 1948. The process continued over the next few decades, with African countries gaining independence in the 1950s and 60s, followed by Caribbean nations in the 1970s. The dissolution of the British Empire was not without its challenges, however. The empire had imposed its culture, language, and political institutions on its colonies, often at the expense of local traditions and identities. The process of decolonization was therefore fraught with tension and conflict, as newly independent nations struggled to find their place in the world and forge new identities. Additionally, the legacy of colonialism left many countries with weak economies and social institutions, leading to ongoing struggles with poverty, inequality, and instability. In the decades that followed, Britain began a process of decolonization, with many of its colonies and protectorates gaining independence. This process was often fraught with conflict and violence, particularly in India and Africa. By the 1980s, the British Empire had dissolved almost entirely, with only a few small territories remaining under British control. The British Empire had an enormous impact on the world, both positive and negative. It was one of the largest empires in history, spanning over a quarter of the globe at its peak in the early 20th century. The empire had humble beginnings, with early English settlements in North America and the Caribbean in the 17th century, and grew through colonization, conquest, and trade. By the mid-19th century, the British Empire was the dominant world power, with a vast network of colonies and territories in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. In conclusion, the British Empire was a vast and complex entity that shaped the world in countless ways. Its beginnings were humble, but it grew to become one of the largest and most influential empires in history. The process of decolonization was gradual and often challenging, but ultimately resulted in the dissolution of the empire. Despite its dissolution, the British Empire's impact can still be felt today, and its legacy continues to shape the world in numerous ways.